Welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This is the B Block, and I'm Alaina Pinto. This is our international block of reports this week. Soon, our coverage of the international scene will be part of a new show designated to cover everything from all over the world. So, if you have any ideas for the name of that show, you can share them with us at info@procannabismedia.com. We start with our coverage from outside the United States with the editor of the Business of Cannabis, Ben Stevens, with the European report. Then Dave Barton reports from the UK, and of course, Debi Facey in Canada.
I'm Ben Stevens, the editor of Business of Cannabis, with this week's report from Europe for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The UK's long-running project to regulate CBD products has just taken a major step forward. Yesterday, the Food Standards Agency, the regulator responsible for the CBD project, announced the launch of a 12-week public consultation on the authorisation of 3 applications, which collectively represent almost 3,000 CBD isolate products. After half a decade of uncertainty, this consultation marks the final phase of the novel foods approval process, putting the UK on track to become the first country in the world to officially regulate CBD foods. The European Industrial Hemp Association called it a crucial milestone, confirming the safety profile of hemp-derived CBD. The 3 applications moving forward are RP07 from Puris, which includes 11 products, RP350 from Canary with 43 products, and the largest by far, RP427, a consortium application covering hundreds of companies and around 2,700 products from the EIHA. These dossiers passed safety assessments last year and now have passed the risk management stage. Chanel McCoy, the founder of her namesake brand that owns Puris, said the progress is the result of a decade of investment in safety studies, adding that the FSA has set a new global standard for CBD regulation. The EIHA's president Daniel Cruz welcomed the step but cautioned that, quote, the details matter in the months ahead. And those details are exactly what the consultation is about. Over the next 3 months, stakeholders will weigh in on key issues, from the proposed 10 milligram daily intake limit, which severely restricts the amount of products that can be passed, to labelling requirements, THC thresholds, and the scope of products eligible for approval. The EIHA called the consultation period key to ensuring the final framework is both viable for businesses and safe for consumers. Responses will inform the FSA and Food Standards Scotland as they finalise recommendations to ministers, who will then change the law hopefully later this year. Thanks to regulatory reforms introduced in April, ministerial decisions now take immediate effect and are published directly onto the official register of authorised products. If approved, these products become the first fully regulated CBD foods in Great Britain, a shift that could reshape the market, strengthen consumer confidence, and serve as a model for regulators across the world. That's all from me this week. I'm Ben Stevens, the editor of Business of Cannabis, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
I'm Dave Barton from Thermador with the UK Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The UK government is set to ban a range of semi-synthetic cannabis compounds, including hexahydrocannabinol, HHC, as well as THC precursors, including THCAA and THCAB. The news comes following warnings from drug experts at the Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs, the ACMD, about potential health risks associated with synthetic cannabinoids and substances that mimic the effects and structures of naturally occurring compounds like CBD and THC. Britain's Minister for Policing and Crime Prevention, Dame Diana Johnson, confirmed she would implement controls under the Misuse of Drugs Act 1971 when parliamentary time allows. The cathedral city of Chichester, a well-to-do middle-class town on the south coast of Britain, has been named the UK's medical cannabis capital. Better known as the hometown of astronaut Tim Peake and for its festival theatre, according to a report from Relief Clinic, Chichester has more patients prescribed cannabis-based medicines than any other city in the country when measured against relative population size. Chichester is also one of the most expensive places to live in Britain, which may also indicate a cost barrier for many medical cannabis patients in other parts of the country. That's all for this week's UK report. I'm Dave Barton from Thermador reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
This is Debi Facey with the Canadian Coast to Coast Cannabis News Report. So what we have in Canada this week is Google has finally allowed us to have a 20-week trial period when it comes to the Canadian retailers in order for them to advertise. This is not only going to be a bonus for us Canadians, but it's also going to be a bonus for everyone else due to the fact that now you'll be able to see kind of what our products are here in Canada and how we operate. But at the same time, I do feel that most of the advertisements will be focused more on education, which isn't a bad thing, but it still allows us to at least advertise and at least create or present some sort of stats when it comes to the promotion. Next, what we have is the initiative from Cancel by creating a upselling your, I will say, your bucket or your trash bin or your basket size, which means that being able to not only create your customer experience, but to be able to excel in creating an actual sizable cart, which means more than one item, which is only going to help the overall profit for that store, which is a great thing. Next we have is Surrey, BC has finally announced that they have accepted the opening of cannabis stores. So in Surrey, they have opened up the first store, which is Imagine, and they have 11 stores following in the next few months. And it's going to be great for BC Surrey because the fact that they have been fighting for them to be able to have cannabis stores, and now that they do, they don't have to worry about it as much anymore. This is Debi Facey with the Canadian Coast to Coast Cannabis News Report. Peace.
Usually when we talk about issues with hemp, the focus is on Texas. Well, now there is confusion with a New England state. This week, a group of farmers from Connecticut has filed a federal lawsuit against their state. The hemp program there started in 2021 when the state licensed farmers to grow hemp that met the federal guidelines of no more than 0.3% of THC in dry weight of flower. Then in 2024, their governor, Ned Lamont, signed a law that redefined the amount of THC in the product to make it more restrictive than the federal regulations. As you might expect, hemp licenses are now down 80% in that state. Connecticut is a legal adult use state, and now the licensed hemp farmers are stuck with crops that are classified as cannabis according to these new state rules. The farmers can't sell it since they don't have a license, a process that can take years, and capital that they just don't have. This is just another example of the mess the federal government created when they legalized the cannabis sativa plant with the 2018 Farm Bill and defined hemp with that 0.3% designation. There is now confusion in every state that has any program dealing with the legal, overregulated, and overtaxed cannabis industry and the hemp industry, which is under-regulated. And this is why we are lucky to have a designated hemp reporter, Kerry Hinkle, who is in the business and has been involved with policy in Washington, D.C. for years. Here's Kerry's hemp report for this week.
This is Kerry Hinkle with Bayou City Hemp out of Houston, Texas, and I am back again with a hemp report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This week, right before Labor Day, we turn our attentions on hemp policy to the federal level, where Congressman Morgan Griffith of Virginia has released a discussion draft bill that would implement some much-needed guidelines and regulations of hemp extracts at the federal level. Now, it's important to note this is a discussion draft, and so it's not been formally introduced. It does not have a bill number or has been seeking other additional co-sponsors. The discussion draft is meant to be circulated to industry and political stakeholders to serve as a starting point in the conversation. And so there's a lot of things to like on this bill. There's guidelines and regulations on labeling and what you can and can't say on a package, do not appeal to children, all things that the industry very much supports. But there's a key difference in this bill in that it would establish a commission to come up with what types of THC limits would be allowed in hemp products from the federal level. And it's interesting that it would be an 18-person panel. 10 of them would come from the FDA and the scientific community. And so the majority shares of the voting rights in this committee would come from the scientific community that would not necessarily have any expert T's in the hemp cannabis cannabinoid science. And so the really important distinction for the hemp community right now in this discussion draft is that if this committee, after 3 years, does not come up with a recommendation on THC limits, then it would trigger at 0.2 milligrams of THC per serving and 1 milligram of THC per package. And if this trigger language happened, what would that happen to states that have already codified hemp THC regulations that are higher than those really limited milligram limits? Is another thing that those in the hemp community, especially on the law side of things, are grappling with. Are states' rights going to be infringed here by this really small milligram limit of THC should and if this bill pass and make its way into law? So now the promising thing is it's in opposition to a complete ban that other politicians like Mary Miller from Illinois and Andy Harris from Maryland have proposed. And so it is a step in the right direction. Again, we're promised that it's a discussion draft, and so we're encouraged by the fact that this is a starting point, and hopefully after our trip, I'll be in DC next week. So hopefully after conversations with stakeholders like ourselves, we can educate on the need for higher THC limits and work through some of the nuances. So positive news for once out of Capitol Hill as it relates to hemp, but some key important factors to still work through. So again, I am Kerry Hinkle with Bayou City Hemp out of Houston, Texas, and I will see you again next week with another hemp report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. We'll see you then.
Another great example of the disparity in cannabis law between the feds and the states is Virginia. The outgoing governor there, Glenn Youngkin, vetoed not one, but two different laws that would have opened adult use sales of the plant medicine. Now, with Youngkin's term up, that governor's race is wide open. Joe Parsons tells us every week which candidates are supporting full adult use legalization and which ones want Virginia to continue its existing medical program. Here's Joe's Virginia report for the week.
I'm Joe Parsons with the Virginia Cannabis Connection from Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WV, and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The second meeting was held this week to discuss the future of the adult use cannabis market in the Commonwealth, in Richmond, Virginia. Virginia's bipartisan commission to establish the guidelines for the hopefully upcoming adult use market met again in the Capitol. And this time they listened to experts from other legal states to avoid the pitfalls that have hindered successful launches. The committee was founded after Governor Glenn Youngkin vetoed and killed all hopes for the market for the second year in a row. Lawmakers from both sides have seen the need to fulfill the promises that were made in lieu of the stance that Youngkin has taken since he took office. The second meeting was a huge success, as not only did they listen to other states, but local businesses that could benefit from a booming new market. The stakes are higher than ever as this election cycle has 3 statewide offices and all 100 seats in the House are on the ballot. We will definitely continue to keep you informed as these meetings develop. Now, last week on Coffee Talk, Seth asked me if Abigail Spanberger had actually spoken out in favor of cannabis reform. We were discussing how politicians often indicate that they might lean towards an idea or principle. However, they never actually decisively say one way or another how they feel about it, or if they will actually act on those feelings. Well, the good news for Virginians is that Democratic candidate Spanberger has indeed spoken out in favor of the legal market and would do what Governor Youngkin would never do, and that's pass the bill into law. She said in an interview with the Mercury that, "I support a legal marketplace for cannabis," going on to say that, "I want to ensure that it is fully regulated, people know what they're buying, and that revenues go towards education." With the election less than 3 months away, her opponent, Winston Earl Sears, has not even attempted to discuss her views, other than to say that she agrees with the opinion of her current boss, Glenn Youngkin. So, we know what that says about the cannabis industry if she wins. As of this recording, Spanberger has a considerable lead in the Virginia polls, according to early polling data. I'd also like to give a shout out to Dave Barton, that's WPCM-TV's own British correspondent, for being on Coffee Talk for this week. So thanks, Dave. That's going to do it for this week from Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WV in Charlottesville, and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Joe Parsons. Until next time, stay lifted.
We welcome back Karen Black as our Arizona correspondent this week. She has a story of continued growth for some operators in her state, including one company that can output 30,000 gummies in a day. Here's Karen in Arizona.
I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting with the Arizona Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. First up, Copper State Farms, a vertically integrated single state operator here in Arizona, just opened a massive new production kitchen in Tempe that can churn out 30,000 gummies in a day. The expansion shows the company's optimism despite declining sales across the state. Copper State is the parent company of Soulflower, which has 9 dispensaries across Phoenix and Tucson. It seems the company is doubling down on efficiency and automation as the market gets more competitive. Meanwhile, Washington-based vape brand M-Fused has partnered with Arizona's Flow Distribution to expand into nearly 3/4 of the state's dispensaries. It's another sign brands are adjusting their strategies as Arizona's once booming cannabis market matures and prices continue to drop. But it's not just legal cannabis making news. Scottsdale police recently made a major drug bust in the heart of its downtown tourist district, arresting 2 men and seizing $34,000 worth of illegal drugs. Officers found cocaine, ketamine, meth, MDMA, Xanax, and some synthetic drugs during the operation in Old Town Scottsdale, which is an area packed with bars, nightclubs, and visitors from around the world. Police say one suspect was a major supplier of cocaine and club drugs in the area. They also recovered $45,000 in cash and 3 illegal firearms. The bust highlights the ongoing challenge law enforcement faces as both legal and illegal drug markets operate side by side in entertainment districts in Arizona. While licensed dispensaries work to expand their reach, authorities continue cracking down on unlicensed sales that put locals and tourists at risk. That's all for this week's Arizona Report. I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
One state that is trying to do the right thing when it comes to regulating the entire cannabis sativa plant is Missouri. However, trying to streamline that effort with a single set of regulations has both sides of the plant fighting against each other. The same thing is happening right now in Texas with a fledgling medical program pitched against a thriving hemp market. Missourians for a Single Market has only raised $6,000 for their ballot initiative for the 2026 elections, and getting traction from either side of this issue has been difficult. What's amazing to many is that this is the same plant that the federal government defined legal by limiting the intoxicating cannabinoid THC to 0.3%. And now, with 2 viable billion-dollar industries pointing the finger at one another, is causing a divide with more confusion for citizens and law enforcement. This all could have been avoided if the FDA had stepped in right after the Farm Bill of 2018 was passed and set regulations like they were supposed to do, but instead they did not do that. In the meantime, a new state entering this arena is Minnesota, and Alysha Bellamy is right in the middle of the educational and licensing process. Here's her report for the week.
I'm Alysha Bellamy for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm also a proud member of the Minnesota Cannabis College and the founder of Herbs and Herbs. Today we're going to be talking about the grant programs that DEED has awarded. They awarded $3.6 million. We have the Can Navigate program, which is a grant that helps with regulatory and legal and technical support. Then we have the Can Startup, which is a grant that helps nonprofit organizations fund micro businesses. Then we also have the Can Train grant, which our organization, Minnesota Cannabis College, received $250,000. And that is to help people enter the cannabis industry. More news is that Minnesota is being sued again by home growers. There's a provision in our state's constitution that says that marijuana should be treated like any other produce. So if you're a gardener, a farmer, or a home grower, you should have the same provisions to be able to sell what you've grown and bring it to market. That does it for this edition of Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Alysha Bellamy.
That'll do it for the B Block, but we have one more section coming up, and in that final section of the show, the saga of the sheriff from Suffolk County in Massachusetts. Stephen Tompkins was in federal court last week facing extortion and fraud charges. Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this break.
What if we're right? What if all of a sudden they discovered that there is medical use for marijuana and that it is good for you and it's better than alcohol and it's better than opioids and it helps your health? What if we're right? What if they find that out?
Specific cannabinoids have medical value. These are facts.
I'm here today in hopes to assist in removing the demonized stigma of cannabis and the perception that cannabis is just about getting high. The true base of this plant has to be known.
I don't think anybody should ever go to jail for cannabis. Get some medicine, and everybody should have access to it.
This is something which, at the very, very least, is the key to alleviating suffering and extending life for millions of human beings. Right? For returning some kind of balance to our society, and quite possibly of restoring our planet's natural balance as well.